In 1969, a small ward on the third floor of Montreal's Royal Victoria Hospital had all its clocks removed. Patients admitted to that wing had no windows, no newspapers, and no visitors who could tell them what day it was. Some stayed for weeks, believing only days had passed. Others counted minutes that stretched into what felt like hours. They were part of an experiment testing whether the human brain could lose track of time itself. The Allen Memorial Institute occupied several floors of the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal, Canada. Dr. Ewan Cameron, a Scottish-born psychiatrist, ran experimental programs there throughout the 1950s and 1960s. He believed that mental illness could be cured by erasing problematic memories and patterns, then rebuilding the mind from scratch. To test his theories, he needed to disorient patients completely, and controlling their sense of time became a key tool. This story matters because it reveals how medical authority can be abused under the guise of treatment. The time distortion experiments were part of a larger program secretly funded by the CIA under a project called MKUltra. Patients who checked in for help with anxiety or depression found themselves subjected to treatments that left them unable to remember their own children. Cameron's program began with a simple observation. Patients in isolation wards with irregular schedules became confused about time. He decided to amplify this effect deliberately. The experimental wing was redesigned to remove all temporal cues. Clocks were taken down. Windows were covered with blackout curtains. Meals were served at random intervals, sometimes twice in what felt like an hour, sometimes not for what seemed like a full day. Nurses were instructed to not respond to questions about time or date. They wore watches facing inward so patients couldn't glimpse them. The lighting remained constant, neither brightening for morning nor dimming for evening. Patients described the sensation as being suspended in a permanent present tense, where past and future became meaningless concepts. One patient, Mary Morrow, later testified that she lost the ability to distinguish between sleep and waking. The constant lighting and irregular sleep schedules meant she could never be certain whether she was experiencing reality or dreaming. She would fall asleep mid-conversation and wake to find nurses telling her days had passed. Other times, she would lie awake for what felt like endless hours, only to be told mere minutes had elapsed. The time distortion was combined with other disorienting treatments. Patients received massive doses of electroconvulsive therapy far beyond standard practice. Some underwent depatterning, where they were given electroshocks multiple times daily for weeks. The goal was to erase existing thought patterns completely. Cameron called it driving patients back to an infant-like state so their minds could be reprogrammed. During these treatment phases, patients were kept in medically induced sleep for extended periods. They would be woken only for therapy sessions before being sedated again. Some patients later reported being unable to remember entire weeks. They would wake believing it was the same day they had been admitted, only to find their families telling them a month had vanished. Hospital records released decades later showed Cameron kept detailed notes on how time distortion affected different patients. He measured their ability to estimate time intervals and tracked how this ability degraded over weeks of treatment. One note described a patient who could no longer tell whether 5 minutes or 5 hours had passed without external cues. Cameron saw this as progress. Medical staff who worked on the ward gave conflicting accounts when interviewed years later. Some claimed they believed they were helping patients by eliminating the stress of time pressure. Others admitted they had concerns but were told the research was classified and essential. Several nurses reported being instructed to maintain detailed logs of patient disorientation, but were never told why this data was being collected. In 1977, a New York Times article revealed that the CIA had funded mind control experiments at multiple institutions, including the Allen Memorial Institute. The agency had provided funding through front organizations without the patient's knowledge. Cameron had received over $100,000 for his research, money that came from intelligence budgets rather than medical research grants. Some researchers argue Cameron genuinely believed his methods would help patients. Others characterize his work as knowingly harmful experimentation.
The truth likely falls somewhere between. A doctor convinced his radical methods were justified by potential breakthroughs, willing to cause suffering in pursuit of theoretical cures. Canadian and American government investigations eventually concluded the treatments caused significant harm. The patients who survived Cameron's treatments faced devastating consequences. Many suffered permanent memory loss, unable to remember years of their lives before treatment. Some lost the ability to care for themselves, requiring lifelong support from family members. The time distortion experiments left particular psychological scars, a persistent feeling that time remained unstable and untrustworthy. Linda McDonald checked into the Allen Memorial Institute in 1963 for postpartum depression. After 6 months of treatment, she could no longer recognize her husband or remember giving birth to her children. She had to relearn basic skills like cooking and reading. She described feeling like she had been born as an adult with no past, living in a permanent present with no connection to who she had been before. Jean-Charles Paget, another patient, later wrote a book describing his experience of time distortion during treatment. He explained that losing track of time felt like losing his grip on reality itself. Without the ability to place events in sequence, he couldn't form coherent memories or make sense of cause and effect. He would experience the same conversation multiple times without realizing it was repetition. Time distortion techniques showed that the human sense of temporal flow depends heavily on external cues and routine. Remove those anchors, and the mind struggles to maintain a coherent timeline. Cameron had discovered that this disorientation made patients more suggestible and easier to influence, though not in ways that proved therapeutically useful. Instead, it simply damaged their ability to function. The experiments contributed to tighter regulations on medical research and informed consent requirements. They demonstrated that treatments causing severe disorientation could constitute psychological torture even when administered in a medical setting. The case became a reference point in debates about the limits of psychiatric intervention and the rights of patients to refuse treatment. We know that time distortion experiments occurred at the Allen Memorial Institute from the late 1950s through the 1960s. We know patients suffered lasting harm and that the CIA secretly funded the research. What remains unclear is the full extent of the experiments and how many patients were subjected to these protocols. Many records were deliberately destroyed in 1973 when the MKUltra program was exposed. The Canadian government eventually apologized to survivors and provided compensation to victims of Cameron's experiments. The settlement came decades after the harm was done, long before many victims had died or were too impaired to testify about their experiences. The Allen Memorial Institute no longer exists as a separate entity, having been absorbed into other hospital programs. Today, the building that housed Cameron's experimental ward still stands as part of the Royal Victoria Hospital complex. The rooms have been repurposed for conventional medical use. The blackout curtains are gone, the clocks restored. But the history of what happened there remains a reminder that medical settings are not automatically safe spaces, and that scientific authority can be wielded as a weapon against the vulnerable. This account draws from declassified CIA documents, Canadian government inquiry reports, patient testimony collected during compensation hearings, and hospital records released through legal proceedings. Some details remain sealed or were destroyed before they could be archived.